Greetings! Welcome to Beatles Stuffology. We're two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie. I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello. I have to say, I'm really excited about this episode. I've been looking forward to talking about this for ages. After all, it's fantastic news, isn't it? That one of my favourite TV series of the 80s is coming to streaming any day now, which is fantastic.
Yes, I'm sure Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd will be thrilled to hear us discuss it. No, wait a minute, that's not quite right, is it?
Oh, no. Okay. Are we then talking about the potential second series of the Oscar Isaac Marvel series?
Oh, you see, you're so close again, and yet it's just managed to swerve away at the last second.
How about the lead actor from Space 1999?
Oh, now you see that's a reference I can really appreciate. I'm very, very strongly in favour of that.
And it works with the M and the L as well, doesn't it? You see, it works. It works on levels.
Excellent work, excellent work. But you're still a decade too late, I'm afraid. Though Space
Oh,
1999 is the late 70s. We have to go back a bit in time.
Are we talking about the song that we've been trailing for about 56 or 57 episodes now?
Yes, I think we probably are. I think it's time for us to embrace. No, I'm not going to do it. But you know,
Were you about to do that vocal opening there?
I was, but I chose not to because I don't think our listeners deserve that sort of offence.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I've written at the top of my notes here is, do we have to talk about it? Well, yes, we do, because we're that kind of podcast. We are doing every song, even though, dear listener, you are appreciative of the fact that there is one on with the Beatles that we missed that we still haven't put out yet. We did record it. We just, for some reason, forgot to put it out. Anyway.
Moving on.
Hmm?
Moving on.
Yeah, moving on. Okay. So therefore we do have to talk about it. But it's Mr Moonlight, by the way, in case you hadn't realised. If this is the first episode you've listened to, good luck. It was nice knowing you. But I think it's worth pointing out we have flagged it as being the epitome of epitome. I've started that sentence and it's going the wrong way. It's not the epitome of anything. It embodies the height of, shall we say, I want to say laziness, but more kind of rushed recording of the Beatles canon, which is why I think it exists on record in the first place. And I have to say, first things first, there are lots of Beatles podcasts out there, and there are lots of brilliant Beatles podcasts out there, and some of them aim for relentless positivity, and that's fine. I really enjoy a lot of those episodes where they are talking up things that are perhaps hidden gems. However, I do also think that it's okay not to like everything a band or a recording artist does. It's perfectly fine. We're not talking about objectivity, and there are plenty of artists who might be held up as being absolute all-time greats. But there are plenty of people who might not take to Bach or Beethoven, Brubeck, B.B. King, say, or Blur. It's fine. But that's because music, as we've said before, has an emotional response. So it's also okay if there are just a couple of things that throw people off the song, because it's perfectly possible that you might hear the introduction to something, or you might hear a really crappy rhyme, or one particular vocal inflection and think, well, that's not for me. And that's fine. And I'll be upfront and I'll say with this song, I really don't like the vocal opening. I think John's voice is wrong for it completely. And I don't like the way the verses wrap up and the way it brings us back to the words, Mr. Moonlight. I think the transition from the previous line doesn't work. I also think the pace of the song is wrong. It feels lethargic compared to a lot of the Beatles' output. But those are my views, and I'm not a music expert. I'm just a fan. Other views are available. And actually, fortunately, we received some other views about this song via email this week. JG, what did our dear listener say? Or who is our dear listener?
Well, our dear listener is Ken with the two N's, and at long last, somebody has really got a hold of us, which is lovely. So, thanks for writing in. Like you mentioned, Andrew, we have been trailing our opinion on this song for quite a while. Clearly enough for somebody to be stimulated into writing to us, which is lovely. So the email says, "Hi guys, just stumbled on your new podcast and love to hear your opinions. Thank you very much. We are opinionated. That's what we do. I live in the suburbs of NY in USA and was 7 when struck by the Beatles on The Sullivan Show. My mom and dad always bought their LPs for me rather soon after release. So I was 8 or maybe 9 when first listening to Beatles 65 on this side of the pond. I know I'm in the minority, but I have always loved this song. Now, Dissecting it as a 66-year-old here are my points for its merit. 1. Compare it to the original. The original has many odd pauses and quick starts of phrasing that our boys ironed out and improved. Number 2, John's opal vocal is amazing. Probably what hooked me in immediately as a child. 3, harmonies are much like Babies in Black and or Two of Us. What's not to like there? And 4, I love the contrast and the roughness of John's voice for the bridge. But the night you don't come my way, I pray and pray more each day, and then softening it down for But We Love You. Now, I'll admit that the organ solo is very cheesy. They probably could have worked that out a bit better. Yes, a bit better guitar part or strings but still, overall, that's my take on it. Hope I've given you food for thought. Ken with two N's. Thank you, Ken. We do really, really appreciate the fact that you took the time to write in and give us your
just
thoughts.
to kind of juxtapose, perhaps, my first exposure to the song came, in my teens, and I think this was pretty much the last Beatles album that I bought. So therefore, I wasn't kind of experiencing it in that linear fashion and seeing the development from album to album to album. I think the order in which I bought the albums helps cement this as an anticlimax. But then, I mean, that kind of proves my point that Ken is able to hear something in John's vocals that I don't. That vocal opening jars for me. John's roughness, as he mentions on there, works for him, but it doesn't work for me. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. In fact, to hear more people saying, well, you know what, I think you're wrong here because, and then for them to give their opinion, I'm all for that. And I thought that was really, really well expressed, and we're very grateful. It's really interesting to hear from someone who is able to remember, not able to remember, that sounds like I expect him to be in a bath chair. Someone who experienced the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. It would be fantastic to hear, Ken, if you dive back into the back catalogue when we're talking about I Want to Hold Your Hand, for example, whether there's some elements there that you could add to the discussion that we had as well, to see what you remember about that particular performance. So really, really appreciate that, and Ken is not wrong, and that's the beauty of what we're talking about is that we are holding these opinions. So we're all for debate on that. Although, interestingly, one of the things I realise I've said quite a lot here, and you've spoken on behalf of Ken, and we haven't heard your view on it. But I'll just say this, and then I'll let you come in. I think one of the reasons why I find it a difficult listen now is because I think it's too similar to the original version. I think it's a very vanilla cover version. So it's interesting to hear him say that they've ironed out some of the the pauses from the original. Whereas the 62 Star Club version, which you can find available on the internet, is a lot more raucous and upbeat necessarily because it's a live version inside a big club set. So for me, that doesn't quite work. The sort of the relatively slow and lethargic pace of the recorded version takes me out of any kind of buzz that I might otherwise feel. What do you think, JG?
Yeah, it's a curious one. I think one of the things that I would like to try and do as we're recording this episode is as we've both mentioned, we've both been fairly insulting about this song prior to actually recording this episode. But actually, I would quite like to try and do a bit of a redemptive reading on it, just to try and find something of value in it. I don't think it's going to be a tremendous success, but I'm going to give it a go. Redemptive readings and the kind of redemptive reading I like doing were sort of pioneered by Dr. Elizabeth Sandifer, who's one of my favorite critics. And she's always been really good at being able to find little gems and little something or other which help to add value. One of the things I think is really interesting about what Ken is saying is that he said he came to it on Beatles 65, and that necessarily recontextualizes the song rather than coming to it on Beatles for Sale. On Beatles 65, it's stuck between, that's rather pejorative, isn't it? It's stuck between I'll Follow the Sun and then Honey Don't. Honey Don't kicks off side 2 of Beatles 65. So it's interesting I must admit, I should have really listened to it in that order rather than having it followed by Kansas City. And the transition between I'll Follow the Sun and Mr. Moonlight, obviously, it's the same on both albums. But then going into something like Honey Don't, that's a curious choice. I'd be very interested to know if that experience is also a little bit different. My own opinion of the song is that it isn't great as it stands, but I think there are some individual elements that work quite well, and one that really doesn't. And of course, the one that doesn't is also the one that Ken mentioned, which is the organ solo, which is the very definition of chintzy. It's just this chintzy, awful.
You were being positive, remember? You were being positive.
Yeah. I will find other things to be positive about, but that's a difficult organ solo to be positive about. Come on, that's a challenge. But I do think there are plenty of elements in the song which are worthy of some degree of redemption. But yeah, overall, yeah, it's not a highlight. I think that's fair to say.
So it's interesting. A while ago, you sent me an article from this new thing called the internet,
Yes.
which praises Mr. Moonlight by someone called Colin Fleming, and I mean he points out the fact that he thinks one of the reasons why Beatles fans perhaps shouldn't take so much against it is because it's pretty similar to the original version. So they didn't do anything crazy with the arrangement and tempo, which creates a certain irony. Anyone naysaying the Beatles version is almost speaking out against the song itself, as if it just doesn't work, which seems a strange reaction in listening to the original. Well, actually, that's another point for discussion. Is that the original version, the original song itself, is still quite a slight thing. It's not a great song, and to me it seems like a bit of an odd choice for a cover. I mean, the song at least does lyrically. Let's sort of put a positive spin on it. It's slightly different from your usual "I love you, you don't love me" kind of song that sort of typifies a lot of the the Beatles canon, or some of their early canon anyway, and some of those covers which are quite meta about music in itself, like Roll Over Beethoven and rock and roll music. So at least there's something different. There's like a character there which seems to draw on some lineage with the likes of Mr. Sandman, so that's fine. But I think I'm correct in saying, although the song is older, it was released as a B-side by the original group, Dr. Feelgood and the Interns, which is a great name, by the way.
Yeah.
The Interns, I think, works quite well, because I gather there might have been some debate as to whether or not there was a band or whether it was all played by one person. But there is evidence to say that it was a band, which maybe we'll mention something about one of them a little bit later. But the problem is that the A side, that was released in '62 with this on, is a song called Dr. Feel-Good, and the lyrics are quite interesting. Now, obviously, it's comic, and you can either choose to see this as an attempt at a comic creation that perhaps isn't hugely successful, or you can maybe view it in a sort of a anti-Shallow Hell type sense. Or is it Shallow Hell? I don't know. I never watched that film. Anyway, hey, all of you women, now don't come around unless you weigh around 400 pounds. I'm from way down home and don't dig chawing bone. You've got to be all right with me because the doctor is really hard to please. Now you talk about women, I love them all. I love them big and then I love them tall. But if you don't weigh what I want, baby, don't come around at all. Okay, apparently the doctor's really hard to please. So there's a story in there about a character who is somewhat interesting. That's not to say that they are celebrating that as a character, but it perhaps doesn't necessarily suggest the greatest musical sophistication in the world. And I think that is also what characterizes the song Mr. Moonlight. I think there's some okay parts in it. The characterization is fine, and on the original vocal take, the Mr. Moonlight opening is perfectly fine. It works with that particular voice, but actually it's just not a great song. And in particular, for this point in the Beatles' career, where so much is changing and developing, and the songwriting of Lennon and McCartney is maturing in some ways, it feels like a really odd pick that is just the result of the huge pressure on them to record 2 albums a year and have, however many singles out, and to go on tour left, right, and center. So they seem to have plucked this song that they had performed, shall we say, back in the day, and thought, yeah, that's fine, we'll do this. Now, I don't know if there's more of a story around why they chose to do this. I'm pretty sure we could, at this point, chuck in the fact that they also recorded the fabulous Leave My Kitten Alone, that has perhaps developed almost too great a reputation, whereas perhaps Mr Moonlight has developed too negative a reputation. But I don't know, it just feels like such an odd choice.
I think it's another one of those songs, and this is not the first time that this has come up when we've been discussing this album, but it's one of those songs that feels like it belongs on Please Please Me,
Yeah.
or maybe at a stretch with the Beatles. It's that kind of 50s stylistic shift that was a real boon when you were going around the dance halls and supporting Helen Shapiro and whatnot. It's that kind of song. It's appealing to a different section of the audience. Here we go. This is me going for my redemption here. It's appealing to a different section of the audience. It's not just appealing to like a straightforward rock and roll crowd. It's not just appealing to people who are maybe interested in sort of American like black girls group. It's this very slightly cheesy kind of 50s sort of ballad, and that in and of itself kind of marks it out as pretty much unique in this album. There certainly isn't another song like this on Beatles for Sale, but at the same time, even although we are still somehow remarkably in 1964, it feels kind of retro. It feels out of place and out of step. And that's, I think, again, I think I said this before, but it bears repeating. I think that's more or less true of every cover version post A Hard Day's Night. They just don't feel necessary anymore. That's not to say that there won't be any good ones, because there absolutely will be. Please see next episode. But it just doesn't feel. But good and necessary are not synonyms of each other, and I think that's the thing with Mr Moonlight. It is similar to the original, so they make a good fist of it. It's not like they completely cock it up or something. I do agree it's maybe a little bit unadventurous, but yeah, they're absolutely knackered at this stage. They're not going to be putting a huge amount of thought into that. Here's another song. We can record it. It's done. I do think that some of the opinion around Mr. Moonlight has calcified to the point where its reputation is worse than the actual song is. It's not great, but it's not the worst thing that's ever been committed to vinyl.
But on this, by the same token, though, I think that also leads to. I'm not including Ken here because he's talking about his reaction to it at the time. But there are some people who almost seem to revel in holding the alternative opinion,
Yes.
in celebrating it in a way that feels more like a reaction to firmly held opinions. Just that attempt to say, "Oh, look at me, I've got an unpopular opinion," which I think is stretching things a bit too far. And I would almost sort of put Mr. Fleming of the internet in that regard as well. I mean, he describes the Hammond organ part as arresting. Now, I think he means that in a positive way rather than whoever played it should be arrested. And he talks about, again, it's that notion of the theatrical, a rhythm and blues song for the cabaret. Okay, all right. I think you're trying a bit too hard here. And yet, funnily enough, he holds similar opinions to me, where he talks about the 62 version as sounding feral. And that's what makes it better. At the Star Club, his vocal shreds. Sure, that's fine. But the thing is, he almost seems to be praising the song rather than the performance that appears in 1964. And that's where I think it seems to become a little bit like an affectation for me, trying a bit too hard to find the positive in something, when actually just let it go. Just say, okay, fair enough, it's not their best work. Great. Let's move on and talk about something else.
That's why I'm trying to strike a balance between saying that I do think that there are elements of this song which are worthy of redemption, but not going like all out to say, oh yeah, this is really great. It's not really great. It's perfectly sufficient. That's about as far as I'm prepared to travel in that direction. But there are some interesting things. I know that there's some debate over whether Ringo plays bongos or is just slapping a chest in this. I really hope it's the second one. I really love Ringo's little percussion line in this. I think it's really charming. He finds a nice way of doing it, and it almost seems to undercut it. Like Lennon is delivering this quite sincerely by Lennon standards. He's not taking the piss. He's not sidling up to it, or like he's singing it pretty straight on. But I like this little sort of pitter patter sound that Ringo's got underneath it. It feels like it's undercutting it. I think it's quite funny. I have no idea whether it's intentional, but that's what I'm going with. And little things like that, it does help to give it something.
I'm just going to move into the mic to try and create the right mood for this bit. When you said that Ringo was slapping a chest on this, I had visions of him ripping his shirt open and beating on his naked, hairy breasts.
I hope that's the case more than anything else in the world. But I just meant like a tea chest or a guitar case or something.
Yeah,
Your version's better. Let's go with your version.
Thank you. Yeah, I like to think there's something primal about Ringo.
I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. But things like that do help to give the song, that little push. And it's not really. I must be honest. That isn't something I thought of before returning to this song for the podcast. And again, that's the pleasure of being able to do this podcast, even in a song which isn't like the best song they've ever done. It's just nice to be able to have, oh right, actually that's an interesting element here. I'd never really thought about that, and that's kind of what I think the percussion in this is.
So here's like an interesting, I think, hey, I'm going to big up my own opinion here, sort of an interesting summation of this. I think it's a song that is the epitome of bang average. And yeah, of course, for the Beatles, it's not bang average. It's way down alongside the likes of, Don't Bother Me, and, well, perhaps one or two of the filler bits on Let It Be, for example, the original pressing of Let It Be anyway. So it's not bang average for the Beatles. And you know what? That says a lot about the Beatles and why we are just one of 3 million podcasts where people saw fit to gather around microphones and share their opinions.
Well, absolutely. And, for all that, this is another thing I think it's sort of worth mentioning is that the position of this song on the album is kind of, I don't know where else you would put it. Well,
please, sir, I have a suggestion, sir. I think we know what that suggestion is. Let's move on.
I think I can hazard a pretty shrewd guess. Yes, but it's again squeezed in between. I'll Follow the Sun and Kansas City. I mean, those three songs. There is nothing that really binds them together at all, other than the band that are performing them. Two very, very stylistically different cover versions and a fairly short McCartney ballad. I was going to say slight, and then I realized, no, wait a minute, I like I'll Follow the Sun. And it's just it's a weird choice. We'll talk more about it when we get onto our discussion of the album, but I think there's a real difference between side 1 and side 2 of this album, and Mr. Moonlight very strongly highlights the arguments I will be making. But I shall say no more. I don't want to give spoilers for our album discussion.
Well, I've given a summation, and you've said I'll say no more. I think that's a bit of a hint there, JG.
I think you might be right. So, all right. Well, this is going to prove interesting. We've tried to be positive about the song. We've managed to find one or two bits and pieces in it that haven't completely slagged it off.
I wouldn't say we tried to be positive. I'd say we tried to be even-handed.
Okay, maybe even-handed is a better way of putting it. But we still need to give it a score. So, for Mr. Moonlight, what do you want to give it?
Justification corner. We really should be using as much of the scale as possible, with 10 out of 10 being the epitome of Beatles perfection, and 1 out of 10 being abject dross that wouldn't even make filler on the weakest of Rolling Stones albums in the late 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, for example. So I'm going to give this a whopping great, and I've kind of hedged between two numbers here. I was going to give it a 3, but I think I'm gonna stick on a 2. Now remember, that's on a Beatles scale, not on a, all songs ever recorded, because then I would say in terms of all songs ever recorded, it's bang average. But for the Beatles, it's pretty much down at the bottom.
I would like to point out, just before I give my own score, that that is the lowest score you have given any song during this project.
Yep, that's fine. I will reevaluate Don't Bother Me at some stage and drop that score. But yeah, that's fine.
Yes,
That's fine. Doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. It just means it's bad for the Beatles. There is a difference.
yes. Are we still going to do an episode where we regrade stuff and we revisit some of the material?
I don't know. I did just dive in and update some scores at one point. So potentially we could do a redemption episode.
That might be something for people to look forward to in the future. Oh, what am I going to give this piece of crap? Oh God, I don't know. It's so this isn't the lowest score I've ever given anything. Is a 2, and that was for Slow Down, which deserved it. So the question is, does this deserve to be better than Slow Down?
Can I say, do you think anyone's still listening at this point?
Oh, I shouldn't think so. But anyway, I don't care. I'm still going through my process. I am going to give it a 3.5. It is better than Slow Down, but not by much, and I feel I'm being generous.
Oh, I just checked. I gave Don't Bother Me a 3, along with P.S. I Love You.
Okay.
So I'd say it's fair. Oh, and also, I Call Your Name. Blimey, I had a run of 3s. I Call Your Name, Slow Down, and Matchbox. Wow, I was going through a bad period. I think that might have been when I was ill, but it's not entirely unfair.
All right, lovely. Let's wrap things up there for now then. You can really get a hold of us, and it's lovely that someone has. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter, /X, whatever the hell it is this week, @Beatles_ology. And we're Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. You can find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot, and you can read some of Andrew's writing at www.stuffology.co.uk. Please also check out my other podcast, which is Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert go through the original Star Trek series episode by episode. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find the show. Next episode, we stay in the realm of cover versions, and it will be Kansas City / Hey Hey. Hey, hey, and we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.